never imagined my story would begin with a single sentence uttered over breakfast. I'm going to Vegas with the girls. No boyfriends allowed. I was 27, then still naive enough to think that trust could carry the weight of any storm. Jessica, 25, leaned against the counter, coffee cup in hand, her smile bright and untroubled as she outlined her weekend plans. We had been together for 2 years, lived under the same roof for 8 months. She kissed my cheek, told me I was the best, so understanding. And I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me cracked the moment she said no boyfriends allowed. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, as if my role in her life was an inconvenience she could check at the door of an airport terminal. I brushed it off, told myself not to be clingy, not to doubt. Love, I thought, was about trust. And so Thursday morning, I dropped her off, watched her walk into the terminal in a dress that looked more like a promise to strangers than to me. She laughed when she said, "What happens in Vegas, stays in Vegas." I smiled back, but something hollow echoed in my chest. That night I opened Instagram. Harmless habit, nothing more. Except there she was in Ashley's story, a rooftop bar, Jessica in the middle with some guy's arm around her waist. The caption read, "What boyfriends?" My stomach nodded. Maybe it was just a photo. But then another story loaded. Video. Jessica on the dance floor grinding against a stranger, while another handed her drinks. Her laughter filled the frame, her hands splayed across his chest. The next video, body shots off a shirtless man who definitely wasn't me. And finally, her own post. Drunk hair, wild voice slurred, "Single ladies weekend. No boys allowed. Means no rules." I sat there in silence. No texts from her, no check-ins. She wanted no contact and she meant it. I didn't call, didn't argue, didn't beg. Instead, I updated my relationship status to single. Then I downloaded Bumble. It wasn't revenge, not really, it was acknowledgement. If she wanted to play single, then single I would be. The next 48 hours blurred into something surreal. She kept posting videos of her sitting on men's shoulders in a pool making out with strangers while her friends cheered her on. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed for the first time in days, not from her, but from matches on Bumble. I went on coffee dates, then brunch. Real conversations, genuine laughter. And all the while Jessica's silence thundered louder than any apology could. When she finally texted, "Who are you with?" I didn't answer. She had said no contact. She had drawn the boundary. I was only respecting it. But when she saw my photos, the panic began. The calls came, then the tears, then the sudden flight home. She arrived at my apartment, mascara streaked, pounding on the door, declaring that Vegas didn't mean anything, it was just fun. But the problem was never Vegas. The problem was that she wanted freedom without consequences, loyalty without reciprocity. She wanted me to trust her while she broadcasted betrayal for the world to see. I didn't open the door. Her belongings were already in boxes downstairs. She cried, she pleaded, she threatened. And I sat at my desk, logged into a video call for work, letting the silence be my answer. Because silence, I learned, can be louder than shouting. Silence can be justice. What followed was chaos. Her trying to rewrite the story on social media. Her breaking into my apartment. Her friends accusing me of cruelty, while the world saw the truth in videos she herself had posted. The woman who once laughed in my kitchen, who once told me I was the best, so understanding, now painted me as controlling, heartless. But her own actions betrayed her more brutally than I ever could, and in the end, the fallout was hers alone. Reputation burned. Friendships fractured, her independence crumbling without the life I had subsidized. Karma, I realize, doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes it comes with screenshots, with consequences, with the quiet dignity of walking away. Because when someone shows you who they are, not once but over and over, believe them. When Jessica came back from Vegas, mascara streaked across her cheeks. It wasn't guilt that I saw in her eyes. It was fear. Not fear of losing me, fear of losing the safety net she had always assumed would be there no matter what. She had grown used to the way I caught her every time she slipped, the way I forgave without questions, the way I let her rewrite the rules whenever she pleased. But that day, standing on the other side of my locked door, she realized something had shifted. I was no longer the net. I was the edge. Her voice cracked through the wood. It didn't mean anything. It was just Vegas. It was just fun. The words came tumbling, frantic and hollow. My hands shook, not because I wanted to open the door, but because I remembered the way she had laughed into another man's chest, while cameras rolled, the way she had shouted, "No rules," as if I were already erased. The betrayal wasn't in her body pressing against strangers, it was in the mockery, the way she broadcasted my trust as a joke. For days she tried everything. Flowers left at my office. Long messages filled with apologies and promises that she would change. Then came the darker tactics, threats to ruin me online, to tell people lies about what I had done, to twist the story, so I would be the villain, and she the victim. And she tried. Social media posts cropped carefully, captions painting me as controlling, abandoning her when she made one mistake. Friends of hers called me, their voices sharp with judgment. But they hadn't seen the full videos. They hadn't watched the way she threw away years for a weekend hashtag. I stayed silent. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood that silence could be sharper than shouting. Silence wasn't surrender, it was proof that I no longer needed to defend myself against lies that collapsed under their own weight. Her desperation only grew. She showed up at my mother's house sobbing on the porch. She sent emails to my boss claiming I had mistreated her. Each time I gathered the screenshots, the videos, the receipts, the evidence she herself had made public. Truth is a patient thing. It waits while lies burn themselves out. And burn they did. Her own friends began to turn when the videos resurfaced. People who had defended her stopped answering her calls. Employers she hoped to impress saw the same clips I had seen, the ones she couldn't erase. She had handed the world her betrayal wrapped in neon lights and music, and now the world refused to look away. I watched from a distance, not with joy but with the weary clarity of someone who had survived the storm. I didn't need revenge. Life was delivering its own verdict. Every bridge she tried to cross crumbled beneath the weight of her own choices, but even as she unraveled, I was still left with the wreckage inside me. Because betrayal doesn't end when the betrayer falls. It lingers. In the way you question your worth, in the way you wonder if trust is just another word for foolishness, in the way silence echoes when it used to be filled with laughter. I began therapy. At first it felt like ripping open wounds I wanted to forget, but slowly I started to see the patterns, the way I had ignored the red flags, excused the small betrayals, convinced myself that love meant patience, no matter the cost. Healing meant admitting that I had been complicit not in her betrayal, but in my willingness to accept less than I deserved. Months passed. My life began to look different. New routines, new friendships, even new dates. Gentle, careful steps back into a world where intimacy didn't mean fear. I wasn't looking for replacement or revenge. I was learning what it meant to choose myself first. The irony, of course, was that Jessica still reached out from time to time. Emails dripping with nostalgia, with claims that she had changed, with photos of us attached, like proof that love could be resurrected. I never replied, because the truth wasn't in the emails. It was in the videos she had posted, the ones that showed me exactly where I stood in her life, and that truth, painful as it was, had set me free. Freedom is a strange thing. At first it felt empty, like walking through a house after the furniture has been stripped away. There was too much space, too much quiet, and I didn't know how to fill it. But over time, the emptiness became possibility. The quiet became peace. And I realized that freedom wasn't something given, it was something reclaimed. I started with small acts. Cooking for myself without worrying about whether she'd complain. Going out with friends I'd neglected because Jessica didn't like them. Sitting in a coffee shop with a book, savoring the silence, instead of checking my phone every 5 minutes for texts that never came. Each moment was a reminder I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living, but healing isn't linear. Some nights I still scrolled too far back in my photo gallery, landing on images of her head on my shoulder, her smile pressed into my neck. I'd remember the softness that came before the betrayal, and my chest would ache with a longing for something that no longer existed. Betrayal teaches you that love and lies can wear the same face, and it takes time to separate them. The real twist came months later when I ran into one of her old friends at a grocery store. She hesitated before speaking, like she wasn't sure if I'd want to hear it. But eventually she leaned closer and whispered, "She's a mess. Lost her job, her friends. Keep saying you ruined her life." For a moment I didn't know what to feel. Pity, satisfaction, regret. But then clarity washed over me. I hadn't ruined anything. She had. She had taken the scissors to her own threads, and now she was tangled in the knots. Karma wasn't a lightning strike, it was the slow collapse of a life built on lies. I walked home that evening with my head high, the air crisp against my skin. For the first time, I didn't feel weighed down by her shadow. She wasn't my responsibility anymore. Her chaos wasn't my chaos. Her downfall wasn't my burden to carry. That night I lit a candle and wrote in my journal, "Her betrayal was the end of us, but not the end of me. I am more than what she broke." The words looked back at me from the page like a promise, one I had written to myself. And slowly, a new chapter began. I started dating again, cautiously, at first my heart bruised but still beating with hope. I learned to ask harder questions, to set firmer boundaries, to trust but verify. I wasn't the same person who had dropped Jessica off at the airport months before, smiling while she said no boyfriends allowed. I was someone who had walked through fire and come out scarred but stronger. Looking back now, I see her betrayal not just as a wound, but as a revelation. It forced me to confront truths I had avoided, that love without respect is a prison, that trust without honesty is a joke, and that silence can sometimes be the loudest form of revenge. I don't hate her. Hate is still a kind of tether, and I've cut that rope. What I feel now is distance, like remembering a storm that once threatened to drown you, but now is just a dark cloud on the horizon, powerless and far away. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been there too, betrayed by someone you loved, humiliated by the way they flaunted their disloyalty, broken by the lies that came after. If so, hear this: you are not the betrayal. You are not the lie. You are not the storm. You are the survivor who found the shore, and once you find it, you never have to drown again. With time, I began to see the betrayal less as a wound, and more as a mirror. It reflected not only who she truly was, but also who I had allowed myself to become, someone too eager to excuse red flags, too willing to carry the weight of loyalty alone, too afraid of being alone to see that I already was. Accepting that truth was painful, but it was also the first step toward reclaiming myself. I threw out the last of her things one Saturday morning. The boxes had sat in the corner for months, gathering dust as if waiting for me to change my mind. But when I opened them, her perfume bottles, a few dresses, photos she hadn't taken, I didn't feel sorrow anymore. I felt nothing. And nothing, I realized, was progress. I carried them to the curb, shut the lid on the trash bin, and walked back inside without looking back. Not long after, she tried one last time. A late-night message. "Can we talk? I miss you. I've changed." I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. The old me would have answered, would have asked how, why, when, would have given her the stage to perform remorse. But the person I had become didn't need the show. I deleted the message, blocked her number, and finally fully let her go. What followed was quieter, steadier. I built new routines that had nothing to do with her. Morning runs at the park, dinner with friends I hadn't seen in years, evenings spent reading, writing, shaping a life that was mine alone. And in that space, joy began to return, not in grand sweeping moments, but in the small things: laughter with a friend, the weight of a finished book, the calm of waking up without dread. I also learned to forgive myself for staying too long, for ignoring the signs, for mistaking patience for love. Self-forgiveness was harder than forgiving her because it meant facing the truth of my own choices. But each time I looked in the mirror and saw not weakness, but resilience, the guilt softened, and one day, without fanfare, I realized I was ready to love again. Not out of loneliness, not out of fear, but out of choice. Because betrayal had taught me the difference between someone who demands trust and someone who earns it. And I knew I would never settle for less again. So if you're listening to this carrying the ache of betrayal, I want you to know, there is life after being broken. There is strength in survival, and there is beauty in rebuilding. The betrayal that tried to destroy you can become the foundation of the person you are becoming. Her Vegas trip was supposed to be a story of freedom, of laughter, of escape. Instead, it became the story of her undoing and my awakening. And though the pain was real, the lesson was priceless. Love without respect is nothing. Trust without honesty is poison. And no one gets to define your worth except you. If my story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own strength or gave you a little more courage to let go of someone who doesn't value you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories told from the heart. And if you've lived through your own betrayal, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear how you found your freedom.